So we began this sugya. I want to just complete that sugya and start the next sugya here on Ayin Aleph Amid Beis of Barach Ad Shelo Nigmar Dino. So I have here a summary of what we discussed last week. I want to go over this summary with you. And what happens is that the Ben Sora Moreh, who was guilty of Zolel Vesove during that 3-month period of time between Shtei Saras and Hikiv Sakon Atachton, ran away. And the question is, when did he run away? The Mishnah says, if he ran away before Gmar Din, then he's potter. But after Gmar Din, he's chayav. And Rashi explains, Barach ad shelo nigmar dino, v'achkach hikiv sakanu potur. Rashi says, v'su lo dainina lo, kevan de'ilu avad hashto lav bar k'tolahu. So Rashi says, in the case where he's potter, because he ran away before the Gmar Din, now if we get a hold of him and it's after Hikif Hazakon, then had he today been guilty of Zol V'Sova, he'd be potter, and therefore he's potter. However, Misha Nigmar Dino Barach, says Rashi, Mishas Gmar Din Aviki Gavra Ktila, it's as if we already put him to death because there was already a Gmar Din. And now we just have to implement that Gmar Din, but he's already a Gavra Ktila, V'shuv Elon L'chapis B'schuso Latzilo. Now Rashi introduces the concept of V'shaftu Elu V'tzilu Ha'eda. That normally Bes Din, especially in a capital case, would be required to look for a schus to save the nidon from Misa, try to come up with some argument that he should not be chayav. So the question that we asked last time was, in the case of Barach Mishanigmar Dino, then we said he's already chayav, and Rashi introduces the concept of Mishanigmar Dino Shuben Lechapis Piskuso Latzilo. It sounds like Rashi's offering a new explanation, a different explanation for Liacher Gmar Dino. I mean, he starts with the logic of Gavra Ketila, that he's already been condemned to death. He's a Gavra Ketila, and we just have to implement that status of Gavra Ketila. But now, Rashi seems to say that the reason why, after Gmar Din we have to put him to death is because there's no Hatzol, there's no din of Vitzilu Ha'eda. I mean, why don't we just say that it's already after Gmar Din, he's Chayav Misa, and the fact that now it's Hikif Zokon Ha'elyon, Ha'tachton, that's not enough for a reason to pater. We've already established a Gmar Din and a Chayav Misa. I mean, why does Rashi have to introduce Vitzilu Ha'eda? That after Gmar Din, there's no longer a din of Vitzilu Ha'eda. Why do we need that? Just simply say that after the Gmar Din, he's Chayav Misa, period. So let's go back for a moment to the case of a Ben Sora Moshe Shebarach Kodim Gmar Din. And Rashi is going to say now that if it was Kodim Gmar Din, then we can apply the principle of Vitzilu Ha'eda. So the difference between Barach Kodim Gmar Din and Barach Li'acher Gmar Din hinges on the existence or lack of existence of the obligation of Vitzilu Ha'eda. In the case of Barach Ad Shelo Nigmar Dino, we have an obligation incumbent upon Bes Din of Itzilu Ha'eda. And that's why we're not going to put him to death. If it's Barach Liacher Gmar Dino, then Rashi says there's no din of Itzilu Ha'eda. So once again, just emphasize this big chiddush that we have here based on Rashi, that the reason why we don't put the Ben Sora Mora to death in the case of Barach Kodem Gmar Din is because of the halacha, the principle of Itzilu Ha'eda. And Rashi says, how do we implement the Itzilu Ha'eda in the case of Barach Kodem Gmar Din? What we're going to say is that now Bes Din can't be Gomer the Din when they get a hold of him, when they find him. And that's because Itzilu Ha'eda says and demands of us to say, well, look, he's already in the state of Hikif HaZakan. If he would or would have, eaten Bezolel the Sobek now, after Hikif HaZakan, he would be Potter, because it's already after Hikif HaZakan. That's called Vitzilu Ha'eda, meaning why is Bes Din prevented from imposing a Gmar Din on this Ben Sora Mora who is guilty of Zol V'Sova before Hikif HaZakan? It's because now when we get a hold of him, and Hikif HaZakan now means that if he would implement those terrible actions of Zol V'Sova now, he would not be Chayav Misa. So Vitzilu Ha'eda says that we should look at it now as if Lu Yitzur, he would be Zol V'Sova now, would he be Chayav Misa? And the din of Vitzilu Ha'eda kicks in here and says that since if he would implement those Zol V'Sova actions now, he would be Potter, therefore we can't be Gomer Sadin. So what prevents us from being Gomer Sadin based on the actions that he perpetrated during his candidacy period? Let's be Gomer Dino today based on what he did yesterday, right? Meaning during the 3 months before Hikif HaZakan. We're not able to do so because the Torah commands us Vitzilu Ha'eda, and that means what would happen if now, when we caught him, he would do the same actions. He would be Potter because it's after Hikif HaZakan. It's an amazing concept here of Vitzilu Ha'eda. Vitzilu Ha'eda means we have to come up with some argument, some sort of logic why we should let the accused off the hook and not condemn him. I'll tell you why. Because if he would do these actions today in front of Bes Din, he would be Potter. How then could we say that he's guilty and condemned to death based on these same actions that he did yesterday? If he did it today, he would be Potter. Why should he chayav for what he did yesterday? It's the same exact action. And that argument that Bes Din is going to put forward, which is going to block them and prevent them from being Gomer Sadin Lemisa based on what he did when he would be before he was Yaakov Zakan. We are prevented from doing so based on Vitzilu Ha'eda. It's like, let's say you were guilty of parking illegally. And until you got to the court, to plead your case or whatever it is, and they want to fine you and penalize you, they change the rules on you. And that same area would be free parking. You're allowed to park there. So before you get to the courtroom, you take a picture of the sign in front of the place where you parked, and it says there parking permitted. So you show it to the court. So the judge, who's not so dumb, is going to say, wait a minute, you parked there a week ago, and there was a big sign there that said no parking. So you're showing me what you would do today, and you would be allowed to park there. Comes along the Tzilua Eda in the case of Ben Soromor and says, well, if he would be exempt from punishment for the same actions that you want to now condemn him for, had he done them today, repeating what he did a week ago, you're saying, well, that's not an action that would generate a chiyuv misa. So why do you want to generate a chiyuv misa for the very same actions that he perpetrated a week ago? And the obvious answer is because today it's already hikif hazakon atachton. Then when he perpetrated this all of this, it was before hikif atachton. So therefore, in one case he's off the hook, in the other case he's not. But yet there's a mitzilu ha'eda. Now after Gemar Din, Rashi says if he was borech after Gemar Din, there's no din of mitzilu ha'eda. Even though I can put forth the same argument, and I could say, well, today that we got a hold of him and we hauled him into Bes Din, if he would implement those same actions, he would certainly be off the hook. He'd be exempt. Why are you putting him to death? But the answer is Gemar Din. Gemar Din is mafkia mitzilu ha'eda. So what Rashi in explaining and justifying the difference between Baruch ad shelo nigmar dino and Baruch li'achar shenigmar dino, Rashi had a problem. He felt that in order to solve that problem, he would have to come up with a new concept, which is blocked by Gemar Din. And what is that new concept that's blocked by Gemar Din? That's mitzilu ha'eda. Now Rashi is in a bind because he has to now imagine or come up with an imaginary explanation for mitzilu ha'eda in the case of Baruch Kodem Gemar Din. And that's where Rashi comes up with this fantastical idea. Well, what would be the judgment if he was guilty of this crime now, of stealing and buying all that massive amount of meat and wine and the whole 9 yards? He would be parted. And that's enough for mitzilu ha'eda. It's almost as if my lawyer would say to the judge, look, judge, you have to have mercy on him because you yourself are changing the laws, and the same exact action that you want to condemn him for today would be absolutely legal. Be fair about it, Maybe the parking analogy is not a good analogy. But what we're looking for is some sort of technicality in which the same action could condemn a death sentence, and if it's perpetrated a day later, it would not condemn a death sentence. And it's all because of a technicality called hikif hazakon atachton. Now, let's see how we're going to read the Gemara line by line according to Rashi. Or Rav Chanina ben Noach shebirech es Hashem v'yachkach nisgayer hot. So again, ben Noach shebirech es Hashem is chayev misa. But before we condemned him in a court, he was misguided. So the Gemara says, Potter, hold the Nishtana Dino, Nishtana Misoso. I think even though it's in parentheses, I think we should read that word. He says that you should read it nishtanes misoso. All right, so you change it from a lashon zok to lashon nekeva. But what's nishtanes dino? So Rashi says, as a guy, all you need is one witness. And one judge. Without any warning. If he would be guilty of the same crime now after Gerus, Binen Hasra, Binen Shnei Edu, Binen Sanhedrin Shalchav Gimel. There are all sorts of requirements here that if they weren't met, he would be off the hook since he's already a ger. Is the shtanis misaso? Rashi says the chol misas b'nei nochsai. Ilu ovid hashta boy libineu b'skila. Hulo ichayev b'ha misa b'hacha v'ilkach pot. So the Gemara says, name him Misayel. The Gemara wants to support Rabbi Chanina from our mission. That Rabbi Chanina's principle of Hoil, V'nishtana Dino Nishtana Misoso, is based on our mission. Barach Ad Shlo Nigmar Dino V'akach Yikim Zokon Atachim Potter. My timer, Lav Mishum Damrina and Hol V'shtani Ishtani. So again, what's Ishtani Vishtani? In the case of Birchas Hashem, as a goy, now he becomes a ger. If he would repeat exactly what he did as a goy today, he'd be potter. There's no asra, etc., etc. So let's support that by the case of Baruch. And it was Baruch before Gmar Din. So if it was Baruch before Gmar Din, if now when we get a hold of him, he would duplicate the actions, he would be potter. And that's similar to Reb Chanina's case of a goyish and his gayer, because they were also, for various reasons, he would be potter as a ger for doing the same exact thing that he did as a goy. So again, if not for Rabbi Chanina, let's try to gauge the Chiddush of Rabbi Chanina. Pre-Rabbi Chanina, what would we have said? A guy, Shavir Chis Hashem is Chayev Misa Sai. And Yisrael, Chasholov, who is Baruch Chis Hashem is Chayev Misa Skila. Now, if the ger, after his gerus, would repeat the same Birchas Hashem that he implemented when he was a guy, instead of being Chayav Sayev today, he'd be Chayav Misa Skila. It's not like the case of Reb Chanina. In other words, the Ishtani of what would be if he did it now, in the case of Reb Chanina, is an Ishtani between one kind of Misa and another kind of Misa. From Sayev to Skila. Not so in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, it's from a Chiv Misa Skila to 0. If he would repeat his Avera of Zol V'Sovei now, after Hikif HaSazakon, he'd be Potter and Ganson. It's not like the case of Rabbi Chanina, where after Gerus, he's Chayav Skila for Birkas Hashem instead of Sai. Excuse me for 1 minute. Sorry. I'm alone and I'm expecting a. Okay. So again, this is a very sensitive point that we're trying to figure out the equation of the Gemara between our Mishnah and Reb Chanina's case of a person who was a guy and he was guilty of Birchas Hashem and now he was misgayer. And his Misa changed from Sayev to Skila, meaning as a Yisrael, his punishment for the same crime is Skila. And the Gemara uses the terminology here, Hol v'nishtanu, Hol v'nishtana dino nishtansa misasa. Now, let's jump to our Mishnah. The case of the Ben Soru Mora, who AWOL, what word could I use? You know, he ran away right before the Gmar Din, and he was guilty of Zol V'Sovei, but now, 1 second. But now, when we get a hold of him, he's already after Hikif HaZakon, and therefore, had he implemented these actions of Zol V'Sovei now, after we got a hold of him, he would be Potter. And the Mishnah says he's Potter. And the Gemara again uses the same terminology. It says, "My timer, lav mishum damrin and hol v'ishtene ishtene." So we're trying to figure out what the hol v'ishtene ishtene is. I mean, you could say the following: his din is changed. In other words, had we judged him then before Barach, his din would have been X. And now that we judge him after we after we get a hold of him, and we pull him by the lapel, by the collar, his din is a different din. That's called ishtane, meaning his din is changed. And we cannot put someone to death when his din changes. So whole ishtane, we'll call it a very technical halacha that patters up a chiyuv misas Bes Din simply because his din has changed. Oh. So we're suggesting the following. Rashi's bothered by the following kasha. And if we can appreciate this kasha, then I think we're going to make sense out of Rashi. I'm hoping. What bothers Rashi? Okay, you have a principle called Hol v'ishtane. We cannot put him to death now, because had he done this avera now, his din would change. So Rashi asks a basic kasha. If there is such a technicality that ishtane, we can't put him to death today, because had he done this action today, it would not be the same din as yesterday, then that should apply even in the case of Barach li'achar Gmar Din. What difference does it make whether he was Borach before Gmar Din or after Gmar Din? Even in the case where he's Borach after Gmar Din, now you want to put him to death. It's Hol v'ishtane. If today he would perpetrate the same crime, he would not have the same din. It's after Hikif HaZoken HaTachno. How do you justify the chiyuv misa in the case of liachar Gmar Din? If you already planted your roots and established a firm principle of Hol v'ishtane should apply even in Barach liachar Gmar Din, because it still fits under Hol v'ishtane. Again, I need your help here. Are you on board with me? In other words, when you read Rashi here, you have to read between the lines, because Rashi is coming up with some sort of fantastical pshat here that it's not reflected in the text of the Gemara. What bothers Rashi? I'm not telling you anything new that you don't know. We always have to ask the question whenever we learn Rashi, what bothered Rashi? But when we answer the question, what was the question of Rashi, you have to be convinced that this was a valid question. So I'm asking you if this is a good kasha. If we understand Hol v'ishtane on a very technical level, then Rashi has a problem. Because that technicality that we can't put him to death today because his din has changed, meaning if he would implement that avera today, he would have a different din. Like, for example, the case of the ger, whose din for Birkas Hashem had changed from a din misa sayed to a din misa skila. So therefore he's potter, he goes scot-free. You have to write a recommendation letter that anyone who, as a guy, was mevarech Hashem, the best thing for him is to be misguided. But if that's the technical halach of whole misguided, then Gmar Din, Kodem Gmar Din, Liachar Gmar Din should make no dent here, should have no relevance, and not change this principle. So even if he ran away after Gmar Din, it's Ishtaneh. Because now that we get a hold of him, ask yourself the question, what would be the din if he implemented it now, after Hakaf Sakon? The answer is he'd be potter. So that's certainly Ishtaneh Dineh. Okay, so it was after Gemar Din. So what? Rashi is bothered by this question. Where does it happen after Gemara in terms of a whole Ishtaneh Ishtaneh? And Rashi now introduces Vitzilu Ha'eda. And Rashi says that once he's a Gavra Ketila, there's no din of Vitzilu Ha'eda. But in the case of Barak Kodem Gmar Din, where he's not a Gavra Ketila, then Bes Din is still wearing, the burden, carrying the burden of a responsibility called Vitzilu Ha'eda. And now we're going to apply the whole Vishtanei Ishtanei. In the light of Vitzilu Ha'eda, we have now whole Vishtanei Ishtanei. That we have to look for some sort of an excuse, or if you will, a justification. I don't know what word to use here in this context, to try to get him off the hook, Vitzilu Ha'eda. And we're going to say, well, look, if he would have implemented it today. But that, if he would have implemented today, would his din change? That's because of Vitzilu Ha'eda. So Rashi is justified now in saying that if it was Barak Liachar Gmar Din, and there's no Vitzilu Ha'eda, then there's no whole Vishtanei Ishtanei. Because the entire principle of whole Vishtanei Ishtanei operates Midin Vitzilu Ha'eda, says Rashi. What does it mean that his din changed? What does it mean that now I ask the question, well, what if he would have done the Avera today? All that is generated by and required as a result of Vitzilu Ha'eda. And what's the Vitzilu Ha'eda? We say, like I gave the example before, you come in front of the judge and you say, well, you're going to condemn him based on a rule that he violated your rule and he was guilty of a criminal act. Well, guess what, my friend, Mr. Judge? If he would have implemented the same exact action today, you yourself would let him off the hook. So why not be consistent about it? Have compassion on him. That's Vitzilu Ha'eda. That entire argument is based on Vitzilu Ha'eda, because if not for Vitzilu Ha'eda, the judge is going to throw you out of court. He's going to say to you, what are you talking about today and yesterday? Yesterday it was a criminal act. And he deserves the full brunt of the law. Today it's not. It doesn't qualify as a criminal act. It's after he gave Hazakah. So what is this argument? That, if he would have done it today, have compassion, blah, blah, blah. It must be based on Vitzilu Ha'eda. Says Rashi, if it's Barak Liachar Gmar Din, there's no Vitzilu Ha'eda. He's a Gavra Ketila. And once he's a Gavra Ketila, we have no other responsibility except to implement the Gavra Ketila, the judgment and the ruling and the verdict that we have already issued, that he has to be put to death. There's no Vitzilu Ha'eda after Gmar Din. If there's no Vitzilu Ha'eda, then this entire whole Vishtanei Ishtanei doesn't apply. Well, he would have a different din today if he was guilty of the same crime today. All that is based, says Rashi, on Vitzilu Ha'eda. But that can't apply in the case of Barak Liachar Gmar Din. So again, Rashi felt that the only way of justifying Barak Kodem Gmar Din as opposed to Liachar Gmar Din, that fundamental distinction in that Mishnah, is only by implementing Vitzilu Ha'eda. What's the difference between Kodem Gmar Din and after Gmar Din? It's got to be because of Vitzilu Ha'eda. So Rashi holds that when there's Vitzilu Ha'eda, then we activate the principle of Hoel V'Ishtanei Ishtanei. And that's what the Gemara means here. Hoel V'Ishtanei Ishtanei. There's a brand new din now. It's called Vitzilu Ha'eda. And under Vitzilu Ha'eda, we ask the question, what would be if he implemented today? Would he get the same identical punishment and the same din as the original criminal act of yesterday? And the answer is no. So it's whole vishnei ishnei. We can't impose upon him a punishment under a verdict, which if he would implement that criminal act today, it would not be the same din, the Gemara din of yesterday. So therefore, he's off the hook. So if we come back to Reb Chanina's case now, what would have been the Gemara din of the guy who was Mavarchas Hashem for a Chiyuv Sayef? Well, guess what? He was Miskayah before the Gemara din. If he was Miskayah before the Gemara din, and now he stands in front of Bes Din as a ger, and we have Vitzilu Ha'eda, and we're going to say, well, if as a ger he would be Mavarchas Hashem, would his din be identical to the din of a guy who is Mavarchas Hashem? If the answer is no, then we apply a whole vishnei ishnei. If on the other hand, there was a Gemara din when he was a guy after he's Mavarchas Hashem, and that Gemara din makes him into a Gavra Ketila, and that's Mafkia the halacha Vitzilu Ha'eda, now we have no right to say, well, it's after Gerus, Vitzilu Ha'eda. If he would have done it now, he wouldn't get the same din. All that falls apart. I mean, the Gemara again is going to reject this because in the case of a ger and a Yisra and a guy and a ger who was Mavarchas Hashem, in both cases he has basically the same din, and that is a Chiyuv Misa, whether it's this Misa called it Sayif or that Misa which is called Skila, it's all a Chiyuv Misa, and therefore you have no right to equate that with the Vitzilu Ha'eda of our Mishnah of Barach Kodem Gvardin in the case of a Ben Soramora, because there the Vitzilu Ha'eda says that for the same exact action be potter completely. Here in the case of Birkas Hashem, you're not going to potter him completely because he's a ger. You're just going to say that if he implemented this Avera Birkas Hashem now as a ger, instead of getting Misas Sayif, he would get a Misas Skila. But again, that's the second half of the sugya. We're working on Rashi in the first half of the sugya, when the Gemara thinks that whole vishnei ishnei is a technical difference in the din, but that technical difference in the din that leads to a ptur of whole vishnei ishnei, Rashi tells us, Rashi reveals to us, is predicated on Vitzilu Ha'eda, which would not apply in the case of Barach Li'achar Gemara. You want to think that over? It's pretty radical, but otherwise, this whole Rashi makes no sense. All right then. Shavua Tov. Everyone should have a great day. Thank you so much.